7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Freethought in Florida. Freethought in Florida is a production of the Atheist community of Polk County. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I'm Sarah Ray. I'm one of the directors of the ACPC. This is Friday, February 12th, 2021, and my co-host tonight is Deborah Smith. We're going to talk tonight about everyone's favorite weird religion, propelled by young men in cheap suits canvassing your neighborhood. But first, we want to say a big thank you to the folks who patronize our show at patreon.com/polkatheists. Patreon is a great way to support the ongoing production of the show and the work that we do here at the organization. You'll join wonderful supporters like Julie and Conrad and Virgil's Cardboard Box. Fantastic backstory behind that one. If you can't spare the couch change, that's fine. We would appreciate you liking and subscribing and sharing out all of the episodes on social media and such with anybody you think would appreciate it. Deborah, how are you tonight?
Sarah, I am well. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me back. I really appreciate you asking.
You are part of the family now. You can't get away.
You know where I live, huh? You know where I live. You will. You know where I live. I get to. Sarah has allowed me a tremendous privilege today. I invited my very first guest on, and that guest is Mr. Bryce Blankenagel. And you all probably know him from such podcasts as Naked Mormonism and Glass Box. And it's Naked Mormonism, not Mormons. So don't, keep it straight. Bryce is not only is he a wonderful storyteller, but Bryce is funny and delightful and knows his topic more than anyone else that I've really ever met. And it was a real privilege that he said yes to coming on the show for my first guest request. Bryce he's working on a book right now. And Bryce, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be your inaugural guest on the show. It's a privilege. Thank you so much.
You are more than welcome. You are. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your book that you're writing?
Yeah. So my the podcast that I do is my primary show is Naked Mormonism, and it's just a serialized history of early Mormonism. And it's all scripted. Everything that I do is all scripted out. So that has generated thousands of pages of manuscript that I'm all, distilling down into a long format book that will be available who knows when. But it seeks to be an examination of biography of Joseph Smith in early Mormonism, highlighting some of the more criminal aspects of the early religious empire, as well as focusing on the possible influence of psychedelics in the early visionary period of the church. So that's kind of my little pet project at the moment.
Okay. Sarah, did you want to cover the ACPA information now? That's currently going on?
No, let's just go right into our chat.
Okay, let's roll with it.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. All right. Bryce, you and I discussed the show in advance, and one of the things that I mentioned to you that I had probably heard you discuss before, I'm not laying claim to having found this on my own, because I didn't, and it surprised the living heck out of me. And that is the fact that when young Mormon men and women go on their mission, there's not an expectation that they're going to bring back converts. In fact, the expectation is completely different, and that's not seen as a bad thing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the missions that happen in the Mormon Church are something that especially young men are taught that is one of the greatest aspirations that you can achieve. That if you go on your mission when you turn 18, when I was growing up, it was 19. You go on your mission, then everything else in your life just falls into line after that. You come back from your mission, you go to college, you get married, you have kids, you go to your career, and then everything just falls like ducks in a row, exactly like the Lord has planned for you. And it's very much instilled from the very youngest ages that a mission is expected. And what you said, I want to pick up on a little bit, Deborah, because there's the understanding that you're going out there to convert people, but also that almost an unconscious driver of going on a mission is to strengthen your own testimony. And a testimony in Mormonism is a very ethereal concept. It's basically the litmus test for where you are in relation to the gospel, the church. How well do you follow it? How much do you believe in it? So when you say my testimony is wavering, you're having a faith crisis, or you have a really strong testimony, then you're a stalwart member and you're doing great. And for many people who go on their mission, they don't have much of a testimony of the church before they go, but they spend 2 years out as a sales force for the church, and walking the streets and becoming exhausted and tired and weak, and having doors slammed in their face constantly, and having people walk up to them on the street and say, oh, you're some of the Mormon missionaries? Well, Joseph Smith was a con artist, right? And all of these things are basically trials by fire to determine how faithful you are in the church. And there's a deep psychological aspect to this of an in-group versus an out-group, of an elitism that comes along with the missionaries, because you are a missionary. You are out on a mission to teach the gospel of the one true church. And anybody who says anything counter to that, or anybody who doesn't accept of the message, is therefore led by the adversary. So it very much creates this concept. Yes, very much so. And it's the adversary. It's very rarely talked about as the devil. It's the adversary. And the adversary can take on many forms, whether that be coffee or watching rated R movies. The adversary lives in everything that we do. So this idea of like being in the world but not of the world, another Mormon phrase, is it inculcates a system or a belief system of elitism in these young teenagers who are going out there. And to be clear, these are teenagers who don't know much about the world.
No,
and
I was going to say these must be really. Not only. If you look at most 18 or 19-year-olds, a lot of them are still fairly sheltered. They're coming out of high school, and you think you know a lot, but you don't. No. And if you look at the age, 18, 19, that's only 10 years away from having believed in Santa Claus. I don't know if Mormons do Santa, but yes. We're talking about, you don't know what you believe. You can parrot what your parents say, but that's about all you can do.
Mm-hmm. So, and this does go a long way to explain. So people will find Mormon missionaries riding their bikes, walking down the street with their backpacks and their Books of Mormon in tow and their little name badges. And they'll be like, they'll have this time where they'll see these missionaries and they'll know something about Mormon history or how much of a fraud Joseph Smith was. And they'll want to just walk up and shake the missionary and be like, just look at your own history. It's all a con. But that's counterproductive, right? Because those missionaries are conditioned to respond to that as an attack on the one true belief that they retain in the one true church. So doing so is very counterproductive. It just causes them to put up barriers that they are retreating deeper into a safe space within their mind. They're not going to communicate with you. They're going to, what Mormon missionaries do, they're going to dust off their shoes and walk away, and nothing from that interaction is going to stick with them. So yeah, it's really a challenge when people will ask me, like, what do you do? How do you talk to missionaries? It's like, man, that's a tough question. It really is.
Well, it is. And here, this is what I've been thinking is there's a great deal of analysis going on right now about how do we, are we frozen, Sarah, or not? Or only the video feed?
You're good.
Okay. Good. There's a great deal of talk going on right now. Well, we have people who believe in various conspiracy theories. They believe in Q. They believe in whatever right-wing thing Fox's or Newsmax is pushing these days. And you want, personally me, I want to shake some of these people and say, but these are the facts. Can I show you the facts? And all that does, I've learned, is it just makes them dig deeper into where they are. It just makes them grab on and say, no, this is what I believe. This is how it is. And I think that if we're going to look at how to reach out to other human beings who have different political ideas or believe in conspiracy theories, I think we can learn a lot from how the practice works for Mormon missionaries. I think there's a lesson to be learned there.
Certainly.
I hope there's an answer for us. I don't know.
And I'm glad that you bring in the concept of other belief systems. And it's like, the idea of like, lizard folk running the world is like, that almost seems like kitschy. That's like funny compared to the conspiracy that we see propagating nowadays. And there's a lot of discussion, a lot of study about ways to communicate across this barrier, or to try and punch through that defensive barrier that they placed up. And there are a few other ways to navigate it in such a way that somebody will be open to having a conversation that are not just general epistemology, discussing why they believe what they believe, and trying to get down to the root of that cause and just shake the foundations of that conspiracy. And it very much works the same way for Mormon missionaries. But I also encourage anybody, if you're going to attempt to communicate with Mormon missionaries or with the conspiracy-laden world that we find ourselves in, know your stuff. You can go into it ignorantly, but the more information that you have, that you are less likely to be caught off guard when they say something to you, the better that communication, or the more likely that communication is to actually resonate with the person.
I could see that. I could see that. Sarah, did you have?
Our friends over at the How to Heretic podcast, and I don't know if y'all have a podcast feud or not, but they're
not that I'm aware of. If we are, then I need to catch up.
Apparently, if you're not listening to the what the hell is it called? Scathing Boys are doing their fundraiser roasts. Maybe you need to listen to the most recent Scathing Atheist. That's all. Anyway, our friends over at the our uncles over at the How to Heretic always like to. And this, y'all are being serious, but as a joke. When the folks come knock on your door, you invite them to do some yard work, because they're racking up. They're just counting hours. They don't want to be at your door either. And you can get them to do some work around your house. I'll make you a sandwich. Here's some water. Show a little humanity.
Well, that's it. And
while they're at your door.
And that's Sarah. I believe in that. I do, and I don't. I've never had a Mormon missionary come and ring my bell ever, so I'm missing out. But I was very popular with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I had this one Jehovah's Witness, a little lady. She would come by about once every 3 weeks. A little tiny lady would come, and she would ring my bell, and she'd say, I brought you this leaflet, and I would tell her thank you. And then I would say, look, can I get you some water? Do you need to use the facilities? Right. It's hot. I mean, it's Florida. It's hot out, can I help you in some way? Do you need something to eat? And she knew that I was never going to become a Jehovah's Witness. And I knew that I was never going to she was never going to walk away thinking, oh, atheism makes sense. But what she saw was someone who was a humanist, someone who didn't need God to tell them to do good, who could just do good. Well, and
there's also a thing that we talk about too, where in a lot of religions, the idea that you go out into the world to evangelize, expecting doors to be shut in your face, right? Expecting to be persecuted. Right, and that fills in the persecution complex and sends you back to your home, your church, where it's safe, where people think like you do, and that's that's a safe place for me to be because we all agree here. But I go out into the world and the world is scary and the world is different and they're going to be mean to me and they're going to be, and that just fills in those grooves that have been carved ahead of time of this is what's going to happen when you go out into the world, and then we do it. So I think you're right. I think a lot of it is.
I like being someone who doesn't fulfill their expectations.
Yeah,
I like someone who isn't what they expect.
And I want to speak to just pick up on what you were saying there, Sarah. You can learn a lot about these mind control mechanisms simply by understanding the day-to-day processes that missionaries go through. Because these messages, these grooves that are inculcated into our mind from a very early age are being reinforced constantly. That there is no escape from them. And that's part of being with your companion at all times. You are accountable. If you say or do something that's not consistent with the conduct of a missionary, you have a companion there who is required to snitch on you. But beyond that, you have the very intensive training process that happens at what's known as the MTC, the Missionary Training Center. And they have, I think, 3 of those around the globe. And after that, period of time, it's usually 6 weeks, or if you're learning a new language, it can be as long as like 12 or 15 weeks or something. You spend that time going through a very rigorous training process to learn how to become a good missionary. After that, you go out on your mission and you immediately report to your mission president, to your zone leader, to the assistant to the president. And there's an entire infrastructure of people there who are keeping tabs on you, who you are reporting to every single day for your conduct from the previous day. So you wake up at 5:30 a.m., 6 a.m., and then it's scripture study for an hour and a half. Then it's exercise time, and then it's breakfast, and then every moment of every day is scheduled and very strictly regimented. You go out tracting, you do meetings, whatever, you spend the day on social media, whatever the case is, and COVID times, and missionaries do their missionary thing. And then you come back home after your day of tracting, after your day of proselytizing, and you sit down and eat dinner, and then it's more scripture study, and then you call your mission president and report your conduct, report your activity for that day. And that is, we met with this many people. We gave out this many books of Mormon. We had this many discussions. And those people who are checking on you, they get to know the people that you're spending more time with. They get to know the families that you have had your second meeting with, your third meeting with, the fifth meeting. And they're constantly asking, so are the Jones? Have you asked them to commit to being baptized? They'll ask you very specific questions about the way that your interactions went with those families that day. And then you go to sleep and you wake up and you repeat it all again. And throughout every moment of this entire day, you always have your companion next to you. And sometimes you'll do transfers, you'll do swaps, you'll get new companions every 5 months or whatever. But there's this entire stratification of people who are keeping an eye on you. So where religions that are typically not very proselytizing heavy, something like Mennonite, or they may have like a system of a rumspringa, where they say, all right, you get a year to go explore, to go to school, to go party, to go learn things about the world. And then at the end of that year, if you want to come back, and this happens when these people are late teenagers, right? Yep. If you want to come back to us after that period of time, then you're part of the group. Mormons go very much the opposite direction of that. In that time period, when other people are having this year of exploration and learning what's out there in the real world, is a 2-year period for Mormons where they are spending every single moment of every single day awash in a system of strictly controlled information, strictly controlled schedules, strictly controlled dietary and dressing guidelines, and everything is very strictly regimented. And all of it is predicated on this system of beliefs that they have been taught oftentimes since birth, that what they're doing out there on their mission is one of the greatest aspirations that they could ever achieve, even though they're teenagers who know nothing about the world.
Yes. It feels just like a giant wave of child abuse. It just feels so horrible.
I always thought it was interesting. So my wife Becca is a former Jehovah's Witness, and so a lot of what you're saying is like hitting home for stories that I've heard around the house here, right? All the hours logged in field service and all of the data that you have to keep on all of these people. A lot of that just it really rings true as being, very similar in nature. I lost my thread. I was going somewhere on that, and now it's gone.
It's like cults all pull from the same playbooks.
Oh yeah.
I very much am in the camp that I believe Jehovah's Witnesses are very, very much a cult. Just same with Mormonism.
It's just the idea that like we're going to give you this knowledge that only we have and you don't have, but you need it because this is the big time here. And who's our messenger? 19-year-old boys in cheap suits. Like,
yep.
I bet Bryce's suit was not cheap.
I actually did not go on my mission. I escaped before the refiner's fire.
Wow.
Yeah. Lucky me.
Yes, very. And you have to raise the money to go on your own mission.
That is correct. Missionaries are generally expected that they save up the $12,000 necessary for their mission for the years prior to usually working summers off of school.
Well, but also too, like the community. Well, maybe this is depending on where you live too, but isn't the community insular enough that if you're going to go work for somebody, you're going to go work for a Mormon-owned company that's like the opportunities to raise that money are probably pretty easy to come by if you're raising for your mission.
I want to introduce the two of you and all the listeners to a phrase that I only recently learned, but it's, a concept that I've known about for a long time, but only recently have the language to ascribe to it. It's known as the Mormon Mafia. And that is a phrase that is used within the church even to describe the in-group family that is Mormonism. And what that means is if you are, let's say, moving across the country and you don't know anybody, whatever the case is, all you need to do is call up the ward you're moving into, their elders quorum president, and he will call and, he will have 5 other elders and himself there waiting at your new house to help you unload the moving truck.
Yes.
And then when you are, moving all of the stuff in on these, these big brawny, strong guys are helping to move all your stuff in and get your house ready. He's also going to recommend, a dentist that he goes to, as well as a car mechanic, and some other businesses nearby, some good restaurants. And, a lot of those people, may or may not be members of the ward or may or may not be friends with the elders quorum president who, it's really likely that most of his friends are members of the church. And that family exists basically anywhere that you go in the United States. It gets far more, diffuse the further out you go throughout the rest of the world. But if you're moving anywhere in the United States and you call the local ward, you got a family, you got a friend group that you get to plug into. And then you show up on Sunday, you're the new face in the ward. Everybody greets you with a big smile, talks about where you moved from, talks about your old bishop, talks about the new bishop, talks about everything about the community. And suddenly you are plugged into the pipeline. You're a member of the Mormon Mafia, and the Mafia looks out for its own.
Wow. It's like Mormons are us. That's really,
I had heard of that, a very exact scenario that you just described from someone that was part of our group early on, identified as an atheist, but moved here from somewhere else, didn't have any connections down here, didn't know anybody. A girlfriend of theirs back home connected them up with the Mormon church, and there you go. Yeah, yep. I didn't know it had a name either. That's interesting.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
The Mormon Mafia.
All right. Do you think I have another question for you, Bryce? Would that be all right?
Good. Absolutely.
Well, I'm just being polite because
a captive audience. Ask me anything you want.
That's it. You are captive. So I thought I should
No. I'm saying the people listening are the captive audience. I'm not the They're my captives.
Okay. All right. Well, we're assuming consent all around while we move to another.
Right.
Okay. Great.
Yes.
Willing captive.
I had a large question for you that we briefly discussed on the phone, and that is, there seems to be an incredibly close, or there isn't anymore because they've dissolved it, but there was a very close link between the LDS Church and the Boy Scouts of America, and I'm wondering if you could explain that to us.
Yeah, so the I'm sure that there are so the Mormon Church and Boy Scouts of America have been very tightly affiliated for now over a century. In the early 19 teens, I'm not sure who the primary movers were in this that made this the possibility. I believe it was primarily a public relations move by the church to become more approachable. If the rest of America knew that most Mormons are Boy Scouts, that makes them a lot more appealing because they were in the 19 teens and 20s trying to break away from their polygamous roots, trying to enter the mainstream of religions. Of Christianity in America, and one of the ways that they were able to do that, of course, was by very tightly stepping into bed with the Boy Scouts of America, and it was intended. So this began a century-long relationship between Mormonism and the Boy Scouts of America that has been mutually beneficial to both of these groups, and it very much plays into the Mormon Mafia mindset that like I got my Eagle Scout. I couldn't get my driver's license until I got my Eagle Scout, right? And it's like, hey, you go in through the church, you get the priesthood at 12, you become a priest at 16, you get your Eagle Scout, you get your duty to God, then you go on your mission, and then everything, those are all part and parcel, broken down smaller steps within the larger timeline of how your life is supposed to go in the church. So Boy Scouts of America definitely, used to hold on to a lot of ideals that the church holds on to, right? The church has these articles of faith, these tenets. We believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and doing good for all men, so on and so forth. And a number of those articles of faith share language and terminology with the Boy Scout motto and the Boy Scout oath. And so they're obviously they're very similar organizations in many ways. While the Boy Scouts of America isn't inherently religious, it does basically require some sort of a higher belief in order to be a member or to be within the leadership of this community, of this organization. So the Mormon Church and the Boy Scouts of America fostered this relationship and built up their mutually respective groups, and pretty soon the lines became blurred. So in Utah, basically, it's well over 95% of the Boy Scouts in Utah are members of the Mormon Church. And Utah is a very large and strong foothold for the Boy Scouts of America because they have such a very strong base there in Utah. Part and parcel with this is the weekly activities in church. You have you go to church on Sunday, but you're usually at church anywhere from 2 to 5 times per week, depending on what callings you have and what roles you do in the church. So for youth in the church, we have what's called Mutual. It evolved from Mutual Improvement Association, but it's just Mutual, and that's where everybody goes to church and you just do youth activities together. So that doubled as basically the Boy Scouts meeting every week. So every week I would go, I would go hang out at the church with my fellow Boy Scouts. And then we would all, on Sunday, we would all, be at church together. It was the same group of people. So it has this very appealing structure for Boy Scouts, where in many places it's hard to get a troop of 5 people in a 50-mile radius to meet on a monthly basis. In Utah, you have troops who are meeting every single week, every single Wednesday or Thursday or Tuesday or whenever Mutual happens. And usually the Boy Scout, the Scout Master is like the bishop or is the first counselor in the bishopric. So somebody who is, can wear both hats in church leadership and in Boy Scout leadership. Well, come 2013, Boy Scouts of America announced that they're going to allow gay people to be in scouting. And the Mormon Church was very averse to this decision, and that began the dissolution of the affiliation between the two organizations.
Are you aware of any? I don't mean to interrupt. Are you aware of any particular pressure that the Mormon Church tried to use to convince the Boy Scouts to not do that?
I don't know of anything explicit,
Okay.
but I'm sure there were a lot of meetings very much related to that. But the final straw was changing Boy Scouts of America to Scouting
Scouts.
of America. It is no longer just a strictly a boys' club. It is an everybody's club now, and the church is very, very sexist. Very,
Yeah,
very sexist.
well, I would think that
Yeah.
boys. Sadly, I have experience with scouting. I was a Girl Scout for a really long time, and I treasure all of it. I learned such good skills, and it made me a more confident person going out into the world. I mean, seriously, when you can, paddle a canoe, catch a fish, clean a fish, dig a latrine, pitch a tent, build a fire, you have a sense of, hey, I have some control over my life. I have some control over how to survive, and it's a good feeling. And I enjoyed scouting. And my kids were in I have two sons. They were in Cub Scouts,
Mhm.
and I found it to be a good thing. And yet, for Mormons, it seems to become a way to say, well, we know that you're young and you're an adolescent and you want to do stuff. So we're going to let you do stuff, except that it's
Yeah, it's very much Mormon branded. Yes. If you're doing stuff and the church can apply itself to whatever that activity is, the church is certainly going to claim that activity. And I do want to speak to something that Deborah was just talking about is Girl Scouts. It's very much antithetical to what the church wants for the girls to be in Girl Scouts. The girls attend mutual. The boys attend Boy Scouts and mutual. The girls attend mutual because Girl Scouts do things that girls aren't supposed to do, like camping and fishing and cleaning a fish and digging a latrine. That's stuff that boys do. So instead, what the girls are doing at their weekly mutual activities is oftentimes sewing or planning for family matters or filling out spreadsheets of what they want in their husband in the future and reenacting temple stuff and reenacting their weddings and stuff. It's very, very 1950s sexist in the church when it comes to Boy Scouts versus Girl Scouts.
Well, and we had talked too back when I was doing Sarah Talk More, the personal show that I do. We would cover a lot of these news stories when all of this stuff goes down about the Mormon Church. And by the way, I should scold all of us because it is not Mormon anymore. It is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Let's get it right.
I have some thoughts.
I'll tell you a very funny story about that later. But they are the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts are two very separate and different organizations. And most people, I don't think, realize that. I think they think these organizations both tier up to the same sort of parent group, and that is just not the case at all.
Very different. Very, very different. Yep. Which also allows for that sex-based discrimination to be taught at a very young age with especially young boys who are going to Boy Scouts. And, people like I have one older sister who's very much loves the outdoors, loves camping, she hated mutual. She would have loved Girl Scouts, but she was never allowed to go to Girl Scouts because Girl Scouts do stuff that only Boy Scouts are supposed to be able to do. So it teaches that sexism from a very young age, and they're just mechanisms that are reinforced every single week that you go to these sex segregated weekly activities within the church, be Boy Scouts or mutual or whatever the case may be.
Right. So let's go from that point. We're sort of talking about the high control cult sort of environment, and the control of children in this environment, and move into protect LDS children or whatever it is Sam's calling it these days. I know he's changed the name at some point, but I don't know if that's the new name or the old name. But there is a a long-standing problem in the LDS Church of having these private, behind closed doors, intrusive conversations with children, with young children, about all manner of things, but especially sex, because it's very important that we know, what you're doing with yourself, and whether you've thought about it or have you touched yourself, and all of that kind of stuff. There's that. It's a huge ball of twine to unravel, but I'll leave it there in your capable hands to figure out where we want to start with that.
Yeah. Well, let's put in a little foundation work to understand how protect LDS children, which is now protect every child, how it came to be. And for that background, we need to understand how kids grow up in the church. And this goes for young men and young women in the church. You have periodic milestones you reach throughout growing up in the church that require you to be interviewed by your bishop. And these are known as worthiness interviews to determine if you are indeed worthy to continue a member in good standing in the church. And part and parcel with these worthiness interviews are a set of questions that the bishop has to ask the person, dependent on their age, to determine what their worthiness is. One of those questions is, are you keeping the law of chastity, which is obviously the abstinence-only version of sex education that the church requires everybody to follow, that the first time that you French kiss somebody is on your wedding day, right? And if you do anything beyond that, it is sinful, it is evil, and you have to repent for it. And what that repentance process looks like is one of these meetings with your bishop. Now, these meetings, they do happen at regular intervals, but there's also, if you happen to do something, if you happen to be caught doing something by your parents, they can also say you're going to have a meeting with the bishop. And this is a precursor to the repentance process. That is, the punishment that you get for whatever you did. So let's say you got caught masturbating. Oh no. I know that no kids actually masturbate, but let's say one Mormon kid does masturbate and they get caught. Their parents may say, all right, you're going to go to the bishop and you're going to talk to the bishop and you're going to figure out your repentance regimen, depending on what your sin is and what you confess to the bishop. So you have this meeting, the bishop asks the details of what happened in order to determine the severity of your punishment. Now, these punishments, they're not typically called punishments in the church, but that's what this is. It's called repentance. It's called the atonement. You are merely, there are steps that are required for the atonement process to actually work, and you have to go through those processes. Now, what they actually look like is it runs an entire gamut. The punishment process can be, okay, so you were masturbating or whatever, but you weren't, looking at porn while doing it, so it's not as severe. Therefore, I don't want you to take the sacrament for a couple of weeks. Now, the sacrament is the weekly ritual that a lot of Christian churches have, but with Mormonism, you sit with your family in the pews and you pass the bread and water, and everybody sitting on the same row as you gets to see whether or not you are taking the sacrament. So if you see somebody sitting next to you not taking the sacrament, you immediately know, oh, they did something wrong. So that's the way of, the public becoming aware to shame you for your behavior. But let's say the sin that was committed is far more egregious. Say it was with you were doing something with your partner. You were making out that got a little bit too heavy or something, right? Then you can lose your callings in the church. You can be released. You can be basically barred from holding any callings in the church, and that's really suspect. People want to know, why haven't you been called to teachers quorum president yet? Why has this not happened? There's always a public aspect to it. Going a step further, you can be disfellowshipped from the church, which is to say you have to go through an entire long repentance process where you can't do anything in the church, not even pray. And they are very strict about what you are able to do. You basically only can go and attend. You can't do anything else in the church. And then the highest of all of these punishments is excommunication. An excommunication comes, like, let's say you were caught not just making out, but you were caught making out with the same sex. You could very likely be excommunicated from the church, which requires you to go through all of the missionary literature again. You have to be rebaptized in the church. You have to redo your endowments. You have to redo everything, basically like you're a new member. And excommunication is the most shameful thing that a Mormon can experience in the church, and it is horrifying. Well, in order to determine the degree of punishment that you're getting, you have to tell your bishop the nitty-gritty details of what happened in your transgression so that he can calculate your punishment, basically. And that leads to interviews that are bishops talking to young teenagers one-on-one behind a closed door with no window on it. Tell me about your masturbation. Tell me how often you touch yourself. And if there's another party involved, in even more drastic cases, like in cases with sex abuse, they will very much often blame the woman in these situations, obviously. But it is very much, they need to know all of the slimy, gooey details so they know how bad you're punished. And those questions can be very, very, very explicit. I would recommend viewers, if you're interested in diving into this, it's very much not fit for radio. Look up the 29 questions that Sam Young compiled from a survey that he conducted of people who support the Protect LDS Children movement. And he collected these 29 questions that are just abhorrent, that adults, unless they were, really good friends in a really close kind of situation, maybe a little tipsy, they may share some of those details. But this is a stranger who is somebody who's a car salesman or a dentist.
Well, that's
asking your kid these things.
Yeah.
That's something I wanted to underscore, Bryce, is that, like, for people who are outside of this organization, right, we hear shit like bishop and we think Catholic Church. We think of, like,
somebody who's trained, somebody
who's gone into clergy, who's, like, gone to school for this stuff. But this is just a dude. And these are kids. Like, if I could underscore the two things, is that, like, how young a child we're talking about, and the fact that a bishop is just a dude.
Yep.
Well,
and it's also done within the context of this shame. Like, you explored sexuality, right? Like, that's something that we on this call, and probably everybody listening, is like, oh, hey, cool. You're a teenager. It's pretty natural to explore sexuality and explore what gets you going and what you like and what you don't like. These are all, like, these are important conversations and important things to have. So you explored your sexuality. You did something sinful. This is your punishment for doing that thing. And that culture continues through your entire life, even, long after marriage in the church. Like, these are systems that are built into the minds of young Mormons that they never shake off. And understandably, a lot of Mormon couples deal with a lot of sex problems, because they were never taught healthy habits. They were always taught to be ashamed of these feelings. And oftentimes they don't have any healthy coping mechanisms for what, gets them going. And that can lead to a lot of very bad behaviors.
Look, I want to take a quick step back here. Yes. You mentioned not safe for radio, but I'm all about making people uncomfortable this week. So here's the questions. Do you masturbate? Do you know what a vagina is? What were you thinking of while you masturbated? Do you masturbate over or under the panties? This is a dude in the ward asking your child these questions. Keep this in mind, parents.
One-on-one,
yes.
Behind closed doors.
Yes. How many fingers did you use?
Oh, dear God.
When was the last time you watched pornography? What type of pornography do you watch? Do you masturbate while you watch pornography? Where and how did your boyfriend touch you? Were your nipples hard? Did you get wet? Where were his fingers? Where was your underwear? What color?
A dentist is asking these things to a 14-year-old girl.
And a dentist that you have to go see for your cavities in your mouth. That's just...
What color were your panties? As if that has anything to do with anything. As if anyway. Did you orgasm? Did you know that once boys reach a certain level of arousal, they have no choice but to keep going? That they can no longer stop their sexual advances. Whoa.
There you go.
Well,
There you go.
that
That
violates
shit is
all kinds of
dangerous.
consent.
That is straight up dangerous.
Okay, let's switch to the other side of the spectrum here. Have you ever put your penis in another boy's anus? And if so, did you like it? Describe the sexual positions you engaged in. Did you engage in oral sex? Did she orgasm? Was she shaved? Did you ejaculate? How many times did he ejaculate? Did you engage in anal sex? Did the boy ejaculate in your mouth? We're almost done. Just hang in there. Did you put your mouth on her vagina or use your fingers? Did he touch your breasts? Did you touch his penis? Did he penetrate you? And then questions they would ask a rape victim. Did you like it? What did you do to egg him on? What were you wearing? And did you orgasm? I think it's important that people hear that shit. Like, put it out in the light of day. This is, again, a dude in, and I know they changed some of this lately, that like, oh, an adult, a parent can be present, but on the other side of the door. I don't know what all the changes were, but it wasn't great. That they're still asking kids, a dude is asking kids these questions.
This is happening every Sunday all over America in Mormon chapels, one-on-one behind closed doors. Bishops are asking these questions to Mormons' kids. And
Are there
it's
parents?
what's weird. No, the
Are
parents,
there parents that say no? Are there parents
yeah,
that
so
say,
there are a
no,
lot of parents
this is
who say
not
you
going to
can't,
happen?
yeah, you can't meet with my kid. And largely those are parents who are familiar with the Protect LDS Children movement and are aware of what goes on. But this is the status quo. Like, this is not weird. This is the majority of Mormons who grow up in the church were asked at least one of those questions at some point. I was asked a few of those myself, right? Like, and I left when I was 16. Like, you have to deal with these questions, these inquisitions, at periodic times throughout growing up. And if you're ever caught sinning, you have to deal with these inquisitions, right? It
This
is
just
dangerous.
so creepy. It's well, it's
But
beyond dangerous.
Deborah,
but it's
hey, you control somebody's sexuality, you control everything about them. It's mind control.
All of us, you know. I was raised as a Catholic, so honestly, all of a sudden, being able to, you know, be in the little room by myself, not seeing the other person, and be able to, you know, walk out and be able to have the damage be limited to, you know, that'll be 5 Hail Marys and an Our Father. That seems pretty lightweight, all things considered. And again, I'm not going to go into a offense or defense about the Catholic Church. I'm just going to say my own experience was that they weren't real interested in what I was doing. They were pretty much, you know, have you been an asshole? You know, are you mean to people? Are you nice to your parents? Are you good to your siblings? And as far as the sex, most of them were like, yep, just, you know, you know the rules and just you go with that. That was, so I can't even conceive of how intrusive this is to a young human being, and
how much it
especially
just
a young human being
screws their brain up.
Yeah.
Well, especially when they know that their parents belong to this church and their parents must believe the things they've done are bad, and therefore you don't want to talk to the dentist alone in the room, but Jesus, you don't want your parent there either. That would just make it worse. I it's mind-blowing. I think that, again, it goes back to one of the big things about cults is you don't get any privacy. You don't even have the privacy of your own thoughts.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, missionaries have to shower with the door open to make sure they aren't masturbating, right? Because companions are always checking and making sure that these 19-year-olds aren't doing anything fishy in the bathroom.
Yeah, that's just creepy, and it has has such a prurient, voyeuristic attitude, and as I said, I believe that children have privacy rights.
Yep.
I know that there are some people that don't, but I believe children have privacy rights. I respected my children's privacy. They respect my privacy. It worked well. We were a household that had that going on. I can't imagine. This is beyond
Right.
taking away your bodily privacy. This is taking away your mental privacy. This is a matter of your thoughts are not your own. You have to, you're compelled to toss them up to literally someone that has no business knowing your innermost thoughts. It's not your business.
It almost beggars description. Like it's almost hard to respond to those things. And Sarah, I'm glad that you read the questions, right? Because that you hear those things in any
well done, Sarah. Well done.
Being asked to anybody, it's like those are creepy questions. But then when you couch it in the concept of how Mormons grow up in the church, the role, the authority role that bishops have. And honestly, the ending result of a lot of this is it teaches kids to lie to authority figures.
Right.
Like I lied a lot in my bishop's
Sure
interviews.
you did.
I was downright ashamed of masturbating. Right. Like it teaches kids to lie.
Yeah.
So needless to say, we can all sit back and be like, well, this has to stop, right? Like this can't be legal. Turns out it's very legal. It just needs to stop. So one person who at the time when the movement was started, Sam Young, he was a former bishop. And now when somebody's a former bishop, that just means they served their entire term. Bishops usually serve for anywhere from 3 to 7 years in any ward, and then somebody's called in to replace them. And it's a very prestigious title, but it's also just a volunteer calling. And these are dentists and car salesmen, right?
Right.
So this man, Sam Young, he served as a bishop, and he never asked these questions. But after one of his daughters came back, after she had a bishop's interview, she was asked some of these invasive questions, and he was like, "This is unacceptable." And he wrote a blog post about it. And the responses revealed that it's very much the status quo, that some of these very gross and invasive questions were being asked. So he decided to picket his local congregation, his local ward, and say, "Stop bishops' interviews." And this slowly amassed into a following, that became known as Protect LDS Children. This evolved into him holding multiple pickets and protests and marching 1,000 people through the streets of downtown Salt Lake City, right up to the doorstep of the corporate headquarters of the church, which is a massive phallus in downtown Salt Lake City, and holding many more protests after that. And eventually, when no action was taken, and when the church did take small actions, they were only ceremonious, and there was always escape language within their public releases during the fervor of the Protect LDS Children movement. Sam Young went on a hunger strike and held a protest for 23 days straight on the Temple Square, just on the sidewalk outside of Temple Square. And the way that he did it was he set out an empty chair to talk to the apostles. And at the beginning of every day, he would call one apostle by name and invite them to come down and sit with him so that he could talk to them about the Protect LDS Children movement. And the only thing he wants to do is put a stop to these bishops' interviews. Just have them be not one-on-one and no sexual questions ever.
Yep.
That was the motto of the entire protest movement. Well, after 23-day hunger strike resulted in nothing, the church called him in for a disciplinary council, and then they excommunicated him. And when you are somebody who is protesting the church and you are excommunicated by the official church, your movement loses all steam in the eyes of anybody who's a believing Mormon. Now, it's a badge of honor for people in the ex-Mormon community if you're excommunicated because you're a podcaster or you're leading protests or you're somebody who's trying to get women ordained to the priesthood like Kate Kelly. It's a badge of honor. But for people in the church, if they learned that somebody has been excommunicated, it doesn't matter what they did. None of the details matter. They are an enemy. They are the adversary. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, it cannot be trusted because they are the adversary. So with one quick move,
because a bunch of old men decided that.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
one of the things that you mentioned about being excommunicated, and this was on the topic that I hope we'll have time to get to if we do, about social media guidelines for Mormons. But one of the things that in that article that you sent me that I read stated that for if you are a child and your parents are gay and you want to be a Mormon, you cannot become a Mormon until you disown your parents.
It's true.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
I feel you. Well, and let's we have a few threads out from this conversation. Let's string them all together, right? So in all of this, the church has come under heavy fire and scrutiny for the way that it conducts raising kids in the church, right? Because you're creating this culture of shame and fear and hatred of one's own sexuality, especially if it's not cis hetero. You have the Boy Scouts of America beginning to diversify a bit. And that is completely antithetical to the way that the church does everything. Add into that, the LDS Church, because of these bishops' interviews, these children are also taught very much so to trust telling their bishop things. They either lie or they trust their bishop. And that gives those bishops a power that is incredibly dangerous, obviously, because you create a system where a completely untrained guy with no background checks is in a closed room one-on-one with a teenager asking them questions about sex.
Yep.
You're obviously going to attract a lot of people who should not be doing those things. So
And
obviously
there we
the
go.
church
I
has
mean-
been caught up in a ton of sex abuse scandals in all of this. And the BYU or the Boy Scouts of America, while they were saying, oh, we'll let the gays in, oh, we'll let women in, we'll diversify a little bit. BSA was also coming under heavy scrutiny for their covering up of sex abuse within their organization. And of course, in Utah and Arizona and Wyoming and Idaho and Oregon and Nevada, where there's a huge stronghold of Mormons who are also scout leaders, those problems are compounded.
Yep.
So the church and Boy Scouts of America divorce. 3 months later, this huge scandal breaks that Scouts of America is going bankrupt because they have so much outstanding litigation involving sex abuse. So
Well-
it's almost like the church was like led by prophecy or something, because we couldn't have their names sullied by sex abuse, could we?
Yes, actually, just a slight correction is that they filed the Boy Scouts of America actually filed Chapter 11, and that means that that means that victims' claims are going to come under the discretion of and the distribution by the bankruptcy court. But they have they have a phenomenal amount of assets. I mean, I think the article that I read said they have like 90 billion in assets. So the Boy Scouts Scouts of America will continue. And it was just a point of, that's all. They weren't bankrupted by the claims. The claims are going to be handled by the bankruptcy court. I know. I'm sorry. I'm splitting hairs here. I don't mean to do that. I just wanted to be legally accurate.
You're making a good point here, Deborah, and I'm glad you bring this up. That Scouts of America is going to survive this. In what form and what that looks like, obviously, this is going to suck a lot of assets from them, and this is going to hurt a lot. They will perpetuate, right? And just as, like, hey, Catholicism is continuing, and we know that there's been 1 or 2 sex abuse scandals in Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
So, like, huge organizations like this will continue. And it may hurt a little bit. They may pay out. They may have to, increase membership costs or, increase or decrease things here. That they will make it work. And these headlines will pass and people will forget about all of these things happening. But it's still helpful to bring the harsh light of scrutiny to these things.
You can't not discuss this. You can't say we want to save the integrity of X, therefore we're not going to discuss Y. It does. We've seen what it's done to the Catholic Church, and this is where I wind up getting. When I think about Catholicism, and I and I speak to, say, someone who is still Catholic, and in my thought process is, hey, if you belonged to the JCs and you found out that they were molesting, nothing against the JCs, yeah, please don't sue me, JCs. It's just an example. I'm pulling a name out of the air, and you found out that they were molesting children, you would leave that organization. So the question is, do you say everybody leave scouting? And maybe that's what, I don't know. Do you understand? And I know Scoutmasters. I know kids that have been through scouting. I know Eagle Scout. There are good things that are done. And so the question is, it's a much bigger question, is that have we created organizations that draw in individuals who are going to prey on children? And I think that you have to start looking at it literally from the top down and say, how do we choose our scouting leaders? How do we choose the people run scouting? What things do we look for that are danger signals?
And that's super important. I agree with you, Deborah. And I think it's also very important to recognize the utility of independent watchdog organizations in all of this, right? Because when it comes to Scouts of America, when it comes to Catholicism, when it comes to Mormonism, we just implicitly trust these organizations to take care of themselves, to police themselves when it comes to these matters. And we see that what that amounts to is sweeping the shit under the rug, right? So we can't trust these organizations to police themselves. But we are very aware of certain structures that can be put in place at various leadership levels within these organizations that would help curtail this amount of abuse, that would reduce the numbers. Like you have a worldwide organization, a religion, or a scouting organization, whatever. Inevitably, those people are going to crop up and bad things are going to happen. But what you can do is put mechanisms and safety nets in place to help people when it does happen and to reduce the amount of people that stuff like that happens to. And we simply cannot trust these organizations to do it themselves. But we also understand that religions, especially in America, enjoy a wide platitude of freedoms and a lack of oversight that all other secular organizations are not privileged with. And no legal body in America is ever going to put mechanisms in place through legal standards to make it so these organizations stop doing what they're doing. So therefore, when our legislators won't save us, when the people who are members of the organization won't step back and say, hey, this is my organization and it's doing bad things, I'm not going to be a member of it, it becomes incumbent on the people who are, quote unquote, antagonists of those organizations to point out how problematic these practices are.
Well, we're doing okay on time here. I want to pull on a couple more threads maybe before we move on, if that's all right with everybody. Okay. So yes, if you think about accountability, with Sam's visibility, the nationwide attention that his movement got beyond the beehive state was good. That was very much needed, right? And if that keeps somebody from slipping through the cracks into Mormondom, great, right? Good. And then you have organizations like Truth and Transparency, Ethan and Ryan, the good work that those guys do, getting leaked documents out into the light of day of things that that have been hidden, processes and money being spent and all of that kind of stuff. So there are some really good organizations that have popped up, but I wondered if we could go back for a moment. I changed my mind. I am going to talk about this a little bit because we're talking about the damage that's being done to children. This results in adults who are incapable of processing the stuff that adults need to process, right? And so I was going to...
Can you expand just a little bit on that?
Yes.
On what you mean by that, Sarah?
Yes. So I was going to save this, and I may still do a little more next week too. I may play the audio next week. But last night I was part of the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Alliance they host an annual Faith Leaders Forum. And I have been graciously allowed into that circle as a non-believer from a humanist perspective.
Awesome.
And, really we're talking about, like, what role does faith, what role does the church, religion play in having conversations with our youth about sex? And it's real tempting for me to say, you shouldn't.
None.
You
Get
shouldn't.
out of there. Get the churches out of the bedroom.
And there was one speaker that, that leaned towards that way and then pulled it back and was like, but if we don't talk to them, they're going to find it out on the internet and they're going to go somewhere else for it.
I'm so tired of hearing that crap.
Well, but here's the thing. And this is my, what I see my role, I guess, as sort of bringing the humanist perspective into this is to champion comprehensive, inclusive sex ed, right? Where we talk about gender identity and sexual orientation, and this is how your bodies work, and here's how condoms work, and here's what this birth control is, and
consent.
Oh, so I did my podcast about this today. You can start with as young as a year or two teaching consent. If you're playing a tickle fight game with your kid and they say stop, you stop. It's that simple. And what you have just taught them is that they have control of their body, and when what they say goes, and that other people will respect that. Like as young as 1 or 2 years old, we can start teaching those lessons in safe ways that aren't even about sex, that are just about, here's your body, it's yours, and you get to decide what happens to it.
Yes.
Anyway.
Oh, I'm a huge, just this point aside, I'm a huge believer in that. And one of the things, one of the things I've experienced in my life is I grew up in a fairly close, I grew up in a close-knit family. We're very huggy people. We just are. We're very huggy people. And, I was very huggy with my relatives, and that was fun. I mean, it didn't make me uncomfortable. I was happy to see them. And, but I have nieces and nephews that are not local to me. So I don't see them very often. They don't see Auntie Deborah that often. And I know there was one visit I made where someone said to one of them, go over and give your Auntie Deborah a hug. And I looked and I said, no. They don't have to do that. And I looked at him and I said, if you would like to give me a hug later, that would be fine. And if you don't want to, that's fine too. Yes. I said, and I held out my hand and I said, would you like to shake hello? Because this was back when we still shook hands.
Shake, high five, whatever.
Whatever.
Yep, right.
And, and it took probably all of 20 minutes before they remembered who I was and they warmed up and climbed into my lap. But it was like, you don't make your kid go and hug or touch anybody. Even if they're related to you, it doesn't matter. You let the child do what is comfortable for them.
Well, as a parent of young children, you got to see one of them earlier.
Yes.
We find that it's difficult for the grandparents to really grasp this concept. Like there is a generational shift that's happening where they really like. I mean, we had to draw the boundaries and say, no, you don't say it's time to go. It's time for hugs and kisses. It's a question. Do you want to do hugs and kisses tonight? And that we respect them and don't play sad or upset or disappointed when they say no, because that's reinforcing the wrong message, So anyway, it took us a lot to get the grandparents on board with that. This is how we're raising our kids, and you got to get with it. But anyway,
so going back to what you were saying, thank you.
So in this forum, we have faith leaders of very different denominations. This year I was doing two meetings at the same time, so I didn't get to pay attention as much as I would have liked. But the prior year, our panel was 4 people and extremely diverse. And the love of like, we teach our kids abstinence only just blows my mind as to that is still just beloved by religion. But on the question of like what role should the church play, in this case, we're talking about crossing those lines and taking way too big of a role. And what we end up with then is adults who haven't been properly educated in sexual health and reproduction, either at school or at home or from the church. They've gotten wrong messages from everyone. And then suddenly you find yourself an adult and it's your wedding night. And so what we end up with is adults that struggle with relationships and their own sexuality and masturbation, because they've been taught their whole life that it's so. Whether you even after if you leave the religion, like, these are long lasting effects that people have to work through then the rest of their adult life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and here's and this is the most. This is where I know. This is where I've seen a lot of parents get isky and kind of back away. When we think of what do we want for our children, we think, well, we want them to find a partner or partners, depending, in life, people that someone's who love them, care about them, will look after them, because the older you get, you realize I'm not going to be on this earth forever, and it would be really nice if my child or my children were loved by someone. You want that. What we don't ever ask of parents is to say, and do you want don't you want your children to have a happy sex life? Because that makes the rest of the relationship work a lot better. And in order to ask that question, most of the parents would have to acknowledge, well, am I happy with my own sex life? Do I enjoy sex? Do I put forth a sex positive kind of outlook? Do I make it so that this is what people do? And sometimes they do this out of love, and sometimes they do this because it's just fun.
Yep.
And if you don't do that, then it becomes something where how do you see that as a goal for your children? And it's not to say that I have to sit down with my kids and explain, well, this is what you do to climax this way.
Right.
It's a matter of them having information. It's a matter of them understanding this is how your body works.
And understanding that porn is fiction too.
Yes.
Yes, well, exactly so. Yeah. And people generally, as if you've ever seen a whole lot of video games or anime or whatever, the slogan is always, boobs don't really do that.
Yeah, certainly.
And or at least mine don't. Anyway, but but really, parents need to be comfortable with their sexuality, and they have to want their children to have happy sex lives.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean you have to be involved, and that doesn't mean you have to know stuff. It just means encouragement. What resources can I make sure that you have? And if you're not comfortable with talking about that, guess what? There are people called educators, and they're good at it. And we should let them do it, because then if they do it and the parent does it, hey, double win. But if the parent's like, yeah, I'm way too squicked out to talk about, to use that word with my children, well, then at least you have an educator doing it.
To put a finer point on that, and also to relate it to the subject material and, reveal my little lens of everything that I see in the world is like Mormon tinted or whatever. Utah just last week voted to remove the module on consent from their statewide sex education program. Because and let me give the Mormon version of that.
Has real emphasis for Mormons. I mean, that's bad for all people, but for Mormons, that goes back to what you said about, well, when men get to a certain state of excitement, they can't stop. So you just lay there and do your
more
job.
Than anything, it incorporates the concept of abstinence only, and cis hetero marriages, or the only approved of marriages and everything, because your marriage night is your blanket consent in Mormonism. You get married, you have no sex until your marriage night, and then from that point forward, anything goes. Introducing the concept of consent into either side of that equation kind of screws up the whole simplistic narrative of abstinence-only education that Mormonism teaches, right?
Yeah.
And it requires people, like you're saying, Deborah, it requires people to sit back and consider what consent means. Are they actually happy and comfortable in their marriages? Are they getting sexual fulfillment from their marriages? Or is there something that they're not admitting to themselves? Or is there something wrong? And not ever acknowledging that sex is ever for pleasure. Sex is a procreative act only.
Yeah.
But you know, after you're married, then it can also be for fun. But it's like, I mean, like really, it's like it's procreative. That's the whole point of doing it, and that's why you wait until you're married, so you can make a big Mormon family, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the concepts that we're discussing here, and the idea of consent, like these have real world implications. And in Utah, they just decided, nah, we don't need to talk about consent in our state. So, Deborah, when you say you have educators, it's also what will the state religion of Utah allow those educators to teach? Because that's an even bigger question.
Well, and the tie-in to Florida in all of this is that we have a couple of bills right now that are being considered. One of them is a parental bill of rights, which I think is bullshit, because if you're going to pass a parental bill of rights, you should pass a child's bill of rights too, because they are autonomous, free-thinking individual human beings that are not the property of their parents. But I digress. And then the other one is called materials harmful to minors. Guess what materials might be harmful to minors?
Pornography!
Sex education classes. So then we're allowing people to.
I was going to say heroin. Huh? Okay, I'm totally wrong.
So these bills would allow you, as a parent of whatever religious stripe, to go in and say, no, I don't want my kid to have this education in sexual health. Now, not that it's doing them any good anyway, because currently Florida law calls for abstinence only. But still, we don't let you opt out of teaching kids about their vascular system or their nervous system. Why we let them opt out of the reproductive system week, just don't. It's another religious privilege, and we got to stop it.
And I can give you a real life example of the fact that this can be dealt with from an incredibly young level with absolutely no embarrassment or shame or just an exchange of information. One of my sons, trying to remember which one of my sons, because when children are when they're toddlers, they just go barging into the bathroom. You have very little privacy in your life at that time. And one of them walked in when I was in the bathroom, and he looked over at me and he said, "You don't have a penis." I said, No, I don't. I have a vagina. He looked at me and he goes, "That's too bad." and I said, "Well, I'll be okay, you know." But it was it was a toddler who could visually see that mommy looks different, commented on it, and it was like, yeah, you're right. I don't. How about that? I have
conversation over.
Yep. Yeah. And it was literally, then it was like, can I have a cookie? Yeah.
Yep.
There was no trauma involved. There was no, I didn't have to now sit down and discuss the entire, how sexual maturity.
Get the charts and diagrams out. Right.
I did not have to do any of that. It was okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I see it very much that these bills that go through and these conversations that happen, and Sarah, like the faith forum that you're a part of, like I see these as indicative, like expressors of where the culture of America is, because we're really fucking weird about sex in this country. Like
Yes.
we're really weird about human bodies, and like I recently had a conversation with my very, very Mormon mom on this subject. Like, you can turn on primetime TV and watch, people, guts flying out and heads crushed and blood and guts, and you can watch people get murdered against their consent, but you can't watch people making love with consent on TV. It's a very, very weird thing. It's a very weird world we find ourselves in.
Well, I'll tell you,
impossible to disentangle the religious aspect out of that.
So one of the things going into that event, Dr. Daryl Ray of Recovering from Religion charged me with this, and now anytime I speak on the topic, I feel required to do it because Daryl's watching. But
all hail Daryl.
Daryl's. I have. He said, Sarah, if you don't do anything else, I need you to normalize masturbation for these people. And I said, okay, Daryl, you got it. That's a very bad Daryl impersonation.
First, though, I saw him.
It's a good message.
Yeah.
It's a good message.
So
he knew that during the Polk County cleanup, you found that glass dildo on the side of the road. He knew.
That's true. He knew. Yep. We didn't keep it though. I really thought we should keep it. Anywho, so I took a page out of his book. He said, "Look, this is what I do," and I said, "All right, I'll give that a shot." And this went over like a brick last year, and it was online this year. But I do Daryl's opener. Everybody, put your hand up if you masturbate. Show of hands, who here masturbates, right? And then from that is. The first year, like the UU table had their hands up and the atheist table, and that was it, right? The whole room was like awkwardly looking around, like, what the hell is this person doing? And so, look, here's a trans atheist woman sitting up on the stage in the middle of a church talking about, do you touch yourself, right? So,
oh my God, to be a fly on the wall. I want to see this.
But I follow that up with like, we've got to get over our own weird hang-ups about sex. If we can't put our hand up and say, yeah, I masturbate, that is the most normal, like the human thing. You're discovering and exploring your body. If that isn't the most human thing, in the topic of conversation at that event, I don't know what else there could be. But if we don't get over our hangups to be able to talk about this stuff between us, I don't know how you expect to teach a kid anything about it.
Right.
So that was my thing. Like you all have got to get over this, whatever this puritanical, like, ooh, sex is weird and we don't talk about it thing. Like, if we're ever going to set our kids up for success, you have to get over that. Anyway.
Yeah, we do. We do. We really do. We have to make it.
I rest my case, Your Honor. Case closed.
Well done, Sarah. Well done. Well done. No, I don't. This years ago, and I'm going back into the would have been around in the 80s, if I'm remembering correctly. Prior to the 1980s, when people had insurance, even insurance through their employers or whatnot, frequently pregnancy was not covered. That was like a separate thing that you kind of got stuck paying for. And then the government came in and said, okay, here's the deal. If you have 15 or more employees, then on your group policy, you have to offer maternity care, same as any other illness. Okay, I'm not thrilled about the illness thing, right. But the point is it has to be covered, same as a tonsillectomy or anything else. And if I had to point to any point in time where things changed, and they changed so much for the worse, and we didn't know it at the time, was I lay all of that crap. I'm using that word very, very precisely, dump all that crap on the head of Phyllis Schlafly and the Mormon board, because they're the ones that climbed into everyone's head and wanted to go back to some idealized version of the 1950s that didn't ever exist. I'm sorry, my rant's over. I just needed to
Well,
share that.
can I soapbox for a second? I want to turn. I want
Please.
to turn.
Please.
I think Phyllis Schlafly, in and of herself, is a fascinating figure in all of this, because she was one. Rewind a bit. So much of this puritanical shit and these holdups that we have, almost all of it, you can boil it down to its constituent pieces, and it comes down to controlling reproduction, controlling women, controlling people's deepest feelings and emotions, ascribing labels to those, determining and teaching those people that those are sicknesses, that those are illnesses, and then selling them the cure. But a lot of it comes down to controlling women. So much of it. And Phyllis Schlafly standing up and becoming a national figure in the mix of all of this, in the mix of obviously the Equal Rights Amendment, which is still a weirdly hotly debated topic today. It's a fascinating subject. Regardless, Phyllis Schlafly standing up and being a powerful woman at the head of this incredibly misogynistic movement is a fascinating example of how people who are subjugated by systems can become the perpetrators of those systems, and even become the directors and figureheads of those public systems. But what it boils down to is, like, they're taught a warped sense of reality from their young age. Phyllis Schlafly, growing up in the 1920s or whenever, right, as a young kid, was taught these puritanical ideas that came from the generation before and the generation before and the generation before. And there's always a deeper regression that you can look to and say, well, maybe it came from here, maybe it came from this religion, maybe it came from this culture, maybe. And really what it all boils back to is, like, religions, it seems like, have always been doing this. They have always been trying to control our human emotions, whether that's fear, whether that's desire, whether that's hunger, whether that's sexual arousal. Religions have been able to control these things because there's something that we as humans, we all share these emotions. And if a religion can brand their words to those emotions, then they control how to interpret those emotions. They control how the people view their own emotions. And then the people who are victims of that abusive system then become the perpetrators of that same abuse. And Phyllis Schlafly is a great example of that. And I have an entire, litany of names within the Mormon movement that similarly did that same exact trajectory. And I like to think that we are in a cycle of chain breakers right now. And we are trying to break away, and it's like, oh, those damn kids, right? Hey, us damn kids are breaking away from the conventions, and then that's regardless of age, right? Like, I see a lot of conventions that my parents broke from their parents, and I'm breaking a lot of conventions from my parents, and we see this progressive evolution of chain breakers progressing society. And I'm just hopeful that, hey, eventually there are going to be more of us chain breakers than there will be the chain, clinkers, and the world's going to get better the longer we keep going.
We're running up on time here, so I want to throw you one final question from the chat, which is, could Bryce speak briefly before you go about the Mormon connection to Florida, especially ex-Mormon, if there is one? Are you aware of any particular unique interest in the state of Florida?
I know that the LDS Church is the largest private landowner in the state of Florida. They own like 2% of your entire state, in the form of cattle ranches and orchards.
Right.
So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, like 2% of the whole damn state is Mormon, is owned by the Mormon Church. As far as ex-Mormon goes, I haven't done any work with any ex-Mormon groups down there. I am sure there are some.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of Mormons in Florida. There are a lot of very affluent Mormons in Florida who have kids who have broken away from their parents' church and have started groups. And I'm sure that there are some, whether they be meetup groups or Facebook groups, Reddit groups. plug into the ex-Mormon subreddit, which is a very thriving and healthy community to explore these topics, and just post a question in there. Are there any, Florida, wherever you are located, Florida, coastal or whatever, are there any groups, meetup groups, Facebook groups that I could join? I'm a member of a couple of Facebook groups of like localities that are, like southwestern Utah and Puget Sound. And like, these groups exist everywhere. It's just a matter of hitting the Facebooks or the Googles and searching for those. You can definitely find them. Yep.
And down here, ex-Mormons are frequently bi-coastal.
Bi-coastal? I don't understand that. What is happening? What? You just threw a Florida word at me, and I'm like.
And
what?
on that note,
is that where you're gonna leave me? What is happening?
Hey, Bryce, tell the people where they can find you and all of your work.
What is that? What is that? Bi-coast? All right, whatever. Okay, we're gonna talk off air. I want to know what the hell's going on here. I feel like I'm the butt end of a joke. All right, so yeah. I do a couple of podcasts. I do the Glassbox podcast, which is a headlines show where we take on headlines in and out of Mormonism to see what slipped through the cracks. We do, deep dives into Mormon history topics and stuff. It's kind of a fun variety show. I do it with my co-host Shannon Grover. And then my primary show is Naked Mormonism. And like I said at the beginning, that's a serialized history of early Mormon history. Episode 1 starts with the birth of Joseph Smith, and then by the end you get to the Road to Carthage series, which goes through just an overview of the entire timeline in 200 plus episodes of how this country bumpkin aspired to become president of the United States and was thereby assassinated during his campaign. Fascinating figure, Joseph Smith. And then, I'm compiling all of that work into a book that it also talks about and examines the psychedelic aspects of early Mormonism. I've written a couple of papers on that topic as well. So, just Google Bryce Blankenagel as you see it printed on the screen or sound it out. Nobody else has my name, so you should be able to find me. And check in and see what I'm doing. And social media, so Twitter, Facebook, same stuff. Shouldn't be too hard to find.
Awesome. Well, we'll have links to all of those things and all of the news stories and topics and things that we discussed today as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bryce, thank you so very, very much. It's been a delight.
Thank you for having me be your first guest. I really enjoyed this, Deborah. And Sarah, it was really a pleasure to meet you as well and get to, familiar with this community here in Florida. This was a lot of fun. I really had a lot of fun. Thank you both so much.
Great.
It's been our pleasure.
Yeah, happy to have you. Come back anytime.
Glad to do it.
All right. Before we close out the show, Deborah, do you have anything going on that you want to talk about? Anything coming up?
Golly, I think I'm going to be in line in a month to get a COVID vaccine.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
I mean, that's about the biggest thing in my life right now.
It's tough around here.
Other than that, no, I do have a research project that I am currently working on. And I've got a few people lined up to interview for a future show that we had discussed before. So I'm doing some work on that.
Awesome. I know Becca was just invited to speak with Foundation Beyond Belief about how our groups have responded in the wake of COVID. So I think that's next weekend, but I'll share links on all of our social media for that. And I also want to share our friends at the Florida chapter of the Satanic Temple are hosting an online event tomorrow night, Saturday the 13th. There are bands from Florida performing live. There's satanic skits that I can't wait to see. Drag, burlesque. It looks like it's just going to be a hoot. And of course, it's online due to COVID. So you can go to thesatanictemple.tv to learn more about that Satanic Temple Florida event. And then next week, maybe we'll talk more about the Faith Leaders Forum and how all of that went. If you want to hear the actual audio of my part of that presentation, you can go to sarahtalk.com. I posted that as today's episode on that show.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific.
So you can get caught up on that. And when that comes out in full, I will share the link to the video for the entire session, because it was very interesting. A lot of people had some interesting things to say.
That's really great.
And then in the next couple of weeks, we're trying to get Dale McGowan of Parenting Beyond Belief fame and Claire Woolner on the show to answer your questions about secular parenting. Now, I spent all day working on trying to figure out the damn tech to get the call-in system working so we could take live calls. Still not there yet. So in the meantime, if you have a question about raising your kids in a secular way, or maybe you have religious family that you're dealing with, or maybe you're in a mixed faith marriage, and you have questions about raising kids in that sort of environment, you can leave us a voicemail at 863-666-0574. And we'll be able to then play that voicemail back and have Dale and Claire and discuss it. And again, that's 863-666-0574. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Love the number.
I did that on purpose,
I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
All right, kids. Well, that's it for this week. Deborah, well done. Great job tonight.
Well,
I love you so much.
Fabulous.
You're so good.
I do. Thank you, Sarah. This is absolutely fantastic, and I thank you so much for the opportunity. All
right, everybody. That's it. Freethought in Florida is available on YouTube, Facebook, and the popular podcast players. You can find all of the links at polkatheists.org/FIF. Please like, subscribe, and share out the episodes. It helps us reach a broader audience. You can find out all about the ACPC or make a donation at polkatheists.org. And follow at Polk Atheists on all the social medias. And of course, still COVID times, please do the 3 most important things. Don't touch anything, wash your hands, and wear your mask. Be safe, everybody. We'll see you next week on Freethought in Florida.